If you enjoy listening to horror stories before going to sleep, I kindly invite you to subscribe to the Scary Cat channel. Story number 1. Ever since I moved into my new apartment, I had a strange feeling that someone was watching me. Every night, I would hear footsteps in the hallway outside my door, but when I looked through the peephole, there was never anyone there. One day, I came home to find that my door had been opened. Inside, everything was just as I left it, except for one thing, a photo of me sleeping, taken from outside my window. I knew then that my stalker had been closer than I ever could have imagined. Story number 2. As a child, I loved playing with my imaginary friend. But as I got older, I started to realize that there was something off about her. She never had a name, and she always seemed to know things she shouldn't. One day, I asked her who she was, and she replied with a name that sent shivers down my spine. It was the name of a girl who had died in my house years before I was born. I knew then that my imaginary friend was more than just a figment of my imagination. Story number 3. I always thought my grandmother was a bit eccentric, but I never suspected anything sinister until the day she died. As I was going through her things, I found a journal filled with strange symbols and incantations. Curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to try one of the spells. That's when I heard a voice whispering my name from the shadows. I turned around to see a figure looming over me, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I knew then that I had awakened something that I couldn't control. Story number 4. I had always been fascinated by the idea of time travel, but I never expected to experience it myself. One day, I stumbled upon an old pocket watch at a flea market. As soon as I wound it up, I was transported back in time to the 1800s. The sights and sounds were overwhelming, but what scared me the most was the feeling that someone was following me. Every time I turned around, there was no one there, but I could feel their breath on my neck. I knew then that I had to find a way back to my own time before it was too late. Story number 5. I had always been afraid of the dark, but tonight was different. As I lay in bed, I could hear a soft whispering coming from the closet. I tried to ignore it, but the whispers grew louder and more urgent. Finally, I got up and opened the closet door, but there was no one there. Just as I was about to close the door, I felt a cold hand wrap around my ankle. I looked down to see a pale, gaunt face staring back at me. I knew then that the darkness held more than just my imagination. Story number 6. I always thought my dreams were just dreams until one day they started coming true. Every night, I would have vivid nightmares about terrible things happening to me and the people I loved. And then, one by one, those things started happening in real life. I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, but as the nightmares became more frequent and more vivid, I realized that I was cursed with a terrible gift. Story number 7. My family had always warned me about the dangers of playing with a Ouija board, but I didn't listen. I gathered my friends and we began to ask questions. At first, it seemed like nothing was happening, but then the board spelled out a name. We didn't know anyone by that name, so we asked who it was. The board replied with a string of letters that we couldn't make sense of. And then, the room went cold, and we heard a voice whispering in our ears. It wasn't until later that we found out the name on the board belonged to a girl who had been murdered in that very room. Story number 8. I had always been skeptical of psychics, but after my grandmother passed away, I decided to visit one on a whim. As soon as I sat down, the psychic started telling me things about my grandmother that no one else could have known. And then, she looked at me with a grave expression and said, "Your grandmother wants you to know that she's not at peace." I left the psychic's office feeling uneasy, but I didn't realize how right she was until I started experiencing strange phenomena in my own home. Story number 9. I loved going to antique stores and flea markets, but one day, I came across an old book that would change my life forever. It was bound in human skin, and the pages were filled with strange symbols and incantations. At first, I thought it was just a hoax, but then I tried one of the spells. Suddenly, the room was filled with a dark mist, and I heard a voice whispering in my ear. I knew then that I had opened a door to a world beyond my understanding. Story number 10. I always thought it was strange that my neighbor never left his house. He would order groceries and supplies online, and occasionally I would see him through the window, staring blankly at the wall. One day, I decided to check on him. As soon as I opened the door, I was hit with a putrid smell. And then I saw them dozens of bodies stacked in piles, their eyes wide open and staring. I knew then that my neighbor was more than just a recluse. Story number 11. My family had always warned me about the cursed mirror in our attic, but I didn't believe them. One day, I decided to see for myself, and I looked into the mirror. At first, it seemed like nothing was happening, but then the reflection started to change. The figure looking back at me wasn't me at all, it was a twisted, demonic version of myself, grinning with razor-sharp teeth. And then, the figure stepped out of the mirror and into the room with me. I knew then that I had unleashed a darkness that I couldn't control. Story number 12. I had always been a skeptic when it came to the paranormal, but that changed when I started working at an old hospital that was rumored to be haunted. At first, I didn't experience anything out of the ordinary, but then I started hearing strange sounds and seeing figures in the shadows. And then, one night, I saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was a woman in a white dress, her hair falling over her face. She beckoned me closer, and as I got closer, I saw that her eyes were completely black. I knew then that the rumors were true. Story number 13. I had always been fascinated by the legend of Bloody Mary, so one night, I decided to try the ritual myself. I stood in front of the mirror and chanted her name 3 times. At first, nothing happened, but then the room started to spin and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned around to see a figure standing behind me, her face twisted in rage. I tried to run, but she followed me everywhere I went. I had unwittingly summoned a vengeful spirit, and there was no escaping her wrath. Story number 14. It was a peaceful night, and I was brushing my teeth before bed when I saw something in the mirror that made my blood run cold. It wasn't my reflection looking back at me, but rather a distorted, demonic version of myself. Its grin was twisted and malevolent, and I could see a sinister glint in its eyes. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the image vanished. But I knew then that something dark and malevolent was lurking just beneath the surface. Story number 15. I woke up in the middle of the night to find a note on my bedside table that read, "Don't move. I'm watching you." My heart pounding, I turned around to see a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was a man with a twisted grin on his face. I tried to scream, but he put a finger to his lips and whispered, "SHH, don't make a sound." And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he vanished into thin air. I knew then that my life would never be the same. Story number 16. I always loved a good scare, so when my friends dared me to spend the night in the abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town, I jumped at the chance. As I sat in the dark, listening to the sounds of the old building creaking and groaning, I heard someone whisper my name from behind the door. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but then I heard it again, louder this time. And then, the door creaked open, and a figure stepped out into the darkness. I knew then that I had made a terrible mistake. Story number 17. I thought it was strange when my new neighbor invited me over for dinner and kept insisting that I try the meatloaf. It wasn't until I found human teeth in the trash that I realized what I had eaten. I tried to run, but it was too late. The neighbor was standing in front of me, holding a knife. And then I woke up. It was just a nightmare, or so I thought. But as I got up to use the bathroom, I saw the neighbor standing at the foot of my bed. I knew then that the nightmare had become a reality. Story number 18. I always thought it was just my imagination when I saw shadow figures lurking in the corner of my eye. But now they're starting to move. Every time I turn around, I see them moving closer, their twisted forms taking shape. And then, just when I think they're about to pounce, they disappear into the darkness. But I know that they're still there, watching and waiting. Story number 19. I was always fascinated by the idea of a haunted doll, so when I found one at a yard sale, I couldn't resist buying it. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but then I started hearing strange whispers coming from the doll. And then, I woke up in the middle of the night to find the doll standing at the foot of my bed, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I tried to run, but the doll followed me everywhere I went. It was then that I realized that the doll wasn't haunted, it was possessed by something far more sinister. Story number 20. I always thought that the old abandoned house at the end of the street was just a relic of the past. But then, one day, I heard a strange sound coming from inside. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. As I walked through the dusty rooms, I could feel a presence watching me from the shadows. And then, I saw her, a woman in a white dress, her hair falling over her face. She was holding a porcelain doll, and as she approached me, I saw that its eyes were following me. And then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished into thin air. But I knew then that the house was far from abandoned. Story number 21. Every night, I hear a baby crying outside my bedroom window. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I saw her, a ghostly figure holding a baby in her arms. Every night, she pleads with me to take the baby, but I know that it's a trap. The baby is not what it seems, and I'm afraid of what will happen if I take it from her. Story number 22. I had always been fascinated by the idea of a haunted hotel, so I booked a room at one of the most notorious hotels in the city. At first, everything seemed fine, but then I started to hear strange sounds in the middle of the night. And then, I saw her, a woman in a bloodstained dress, her hair falling over her face. She was holding a key, and as she approached me, I could hear her whispering, "Room 666. I knew then that I had made a terrible mistake. Story number 23. I loved hiking in the woods, but one day, I stumbled upon a clearing that I had never seen before. At the center of the clearing was a single gravestone, and as I approached it, I felt a chill run down my spine. The name on the gravestone was mine. And then, I heard a voice whispering in my ear, "This is where you'll end up." I tried to run, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching me. Story number 24. As a child, I was always afraid of the dark, but now I realized that the light was the real danger. Every time I turn on the light, I see them shadow figures lurking in the corners, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. And then, just when I think I'm safe, they disappear into the darkness. But I know that they're still there, waiting for their next victim. Story number 25. I had always been afraid of clowns, but I never expected to come face to face with one in my own home. One night, I woke up to find a clown standing at the foot of my bed, its painted grin twisted and malevolent. It handed me a balloon, and as I reached out to take it, I felt a sharp pain in my hand. And then, everything went dark. When I woke up, the clown was gone, but I knew that it had left something inside me. Story number 26. I always thought that the old abandoned amusement park was just a relic of the past, but then I found an old ticket that transported me back in time. The park was alive with the sounds of laughter and screams, but there was something off about the people there. They had empty eyes and twisted grins, and as I tried to leave, I realized that I was trapped. The park had claimed me as its own, and there was no escaping its clutches. Story number 27. I loved collecting antique dolls, but one day, I found one that was unlike any other. Its eyes seemed to follow me wherever I went, and every time I picked it up, I heard a faint whispering. And then, one night, I woke up to find the doll sitting at the foot of my bed, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It spoke to me in a language that I couldn't understand, and as I listened, I realized that the doll was not what it seemed. Story number 28. I had always been afraid of the dark, but one night, I decided to confront my fear. I sat in the pitch-black room, listening to the sound of my own breathing. And then, I heard something else, a soft whispering. At first, I couldn't make out what it was saying, but as it grew louder, I realized that it was a voice from beyond the grave. It was the voice of someone who had been trapped in the darkness for far too long. Story number 29. I had always been skeptical of the occult, but one day, I stumbled upon a group of people performing a dark ritual in the woods. Against my better judgment, I approached them, and they invited me to join in. At first, it seemed like nothing was happening, but then the sky turned black, and I heard a voice speaking in tongues. I tried to run, but the group followed me, chanting in unison. It wasn't until later that I realized what I had unwittingly summoned.